Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was February 19th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico. And this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcora Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is super fun. It's about a troubadour, and we get a little window into some of the troubadour culture that Joan and Violante were setting up at the beginning of their reign. So this is a document from Joan. It's in a commune register, so these are the documents that don't really require the secret seal. And it's a letter of safe passage for a troubadour. This particular document is one that is in Latin, but it's fully beautifully transcribed in the collection of music-related documents put together by Trenxo Dana and by Hesi Hardy in their collection that I've referred to earlier on the podcast. So they have done a beautiful job of transcribing the Latin, and so I know exactly what this says. Not because when the paleography is taken out of the picture I can understand Latin perfectly, no, but when I have a transcription that I can copy-paste into Google Translate, then I can get a translation that I can then go through and proofread, and that is my method for handling the lovely situation when I have a document that's already transcribed for me. And so in this document, we have a pretty straightforward situation. A troubadour is traveling through France, and Joan has written him a safe conduct letter that he can show to the authorities and all of the territories that he's passing through as he is getting to his destination. But there's a lot that comes up in this fairly straightforward document. Its purpose is pretty straightforward, but then we can kind of read against the grain of this document in order to make some inferences about some aspects of troubadour culture, cultural diffusion, as well as conditions in the royal family. And so there's a way to get a lot out of this that has really nothing to do with the intention of the document itself. And so this is something that historians love to do, and it's a key practice that you don't just kind of say, oh, this document is about a land sale, so it's only about land sale, or this document, in today's case, is about safe conduct, so it's only about traveling across territories. No, you wanna look at the document and what's in it with questions in mind that could take you in directions other than what the stated purpose or surface level meaning of the document might be. And this is a really great example of that. Let's start out with how the subject of this letter, the person who is at the center of this letter, is identified. In Latin, Let's try that again. In Latin, Jacobinus de Bar. Jacobinus de Bar. There we go. And it's the name Jacob. So Jacob of Bar. Sound familiar? Yeah, this is someone who's named after the same region that Violante is named after. So Violante came from Bar. She's the daughter of Robert of Bar, Robert de Bar. And that region in itself has a really interesting history. The Duchy of Bar was created for Violante's father for staying loyal to the French king at the time. I think that was Jean the First. And Robert was given this real kind of patchwork of lands that are what is today close to the German border, the eastern part of France, and they're really disconnected. It almost looks, if you're looking at it on a map, I'll see if I can actually find an image of it and put it on the webpage for today's document. It looks like kind of like a bunch of grapes because there's these little units that are kind of connected by stems or something. So it's an odd little duchy, but really the important thing is that not so much the shape of it as just the status of it, of being a duke, is a really big deal, and it elevates you in your status when you're hanging out in Paris. And so that's really the reason for creating that duchy. And, okay, we've got a minstrel who's from there. That's great. And maybe this is how Violante found out that the rumors had spread all the way back to the eastern part of France about Joan's illness. Maybe she heard it from this minstrel. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how comfortable a minstrel would be saying, hey, word has spread that the king was, deathly ill. But I don't know. It's just interesting to note that on February 18th, we have Violante writing to her father saying, don't believe those rumors. And then on December 19th, we have this minstrel who's from Bar being given this safe conduct letter. So not quite sure what to make of that. I think it's not likely to be a pure coincidence, but I'm also pretty sure that a minstrel would not be the messenger necessarily, but he could be the carrier of the letter. So perhaps Violante is sending the letter with this minstrel as he goes back to France. All right, so Jacob de Bar. Let's talk about minstrels and their traveling habits. It's really clear from the work of music historians that Joan was recruiting minstrels from very far away, like Flanders and Bavaria and England, way early in his lifetime. So pretty much as soon as he can, he's trying to commission the travel of minstrels to perform in his ducal court as the Duke of Girona. And we see this in the time that he was married to his first wife, Mata d'Armagnac, in the 1370s. And of course, this really picks up steam after he's able to plug in to the social network of Violante de Bar after their marriage. So minstrels are coming from all over the place, and also musical instruments are coming from all over the place. Joan really likes to collect musical instruments, and we had a document earlier in the podcast about that. So this Jacob de Bar is a minstrel that has traveled quite far in order to perform, but to perform for somebody quite special, the 3-year-old Prince Jaume. And here Jaume is referred to as Jacobi, So in Latin, the name that we would associate with Jacob was used for Jaume. It's interesting because James is like an English form of Jacob. And in English, though, we think of these as very different names. But in fact, James and Jacob, they're in Latin, they're the same. Well, they have the same origin point in Latin, I guess is a better way to say it. So Jaume, who's referred to here as primogeniti nostri carissimi, our most dear firstborn. And then we've got his French title, Dauphini Gironde, the Dauphin of Girona. And then he also has another title that's listed here, the Count of Cervera, Comitis Cervariae. So this minstrel is designated as a minstrel for the 3-year-old prince. What does that mean? Does that really mean that he is dedicated really only to performing for the 3-year-old? I mean, obviously it's not going to only be the minstrel and the toddler. It's going to be the other people around at all the performances. But I get the feeling that Jacob de Bar might specialize in, I don't know, like the medieval equivalent of Baby Shark. That this is somebody who's capable of doing music and entertainment for kids. And this is probably, not somebody who is only going to be performing that crazy cutting edge ars subtilior that, is very kind of hard on the ears, but can be an acquired taste for those sophisticated enough to enjoy it. So yeah, maybe Jacob de Bar can also do some ars subtilior for the adults after little Jaume's bedtime. But here he is identified as the minstrel that is really for the Prince Jaume. So that's a really interesting feature of all of this, that we've got minstrels that are associated with individuals in the royal family. And that is actually something that's corroborated by a bunch of other documents where there's a particular minstrel who is identified as belonging to the house of the queen or the king's royal court, royal household. So there's certain minstrels that have long-term appointments in the households of different members of the royal family. And then there's other minstrels who are just passing through, and they're not really getting that long-term appointment. And so that's just another distinction for how this musical patronage was organized. And I think it's super interesting to see all these different angles on it and to try to imagine how there were acts that were passing through and would perform for just one night or 2 nights maybe, and then maybe they could have kind of jam sessions with the long-term house troubadours. It would be pretty cool. Anyway, that's just my guessing at how all of this might work. One thing that I want to mention before I forget, and I actually wanted to put it earlier in today's podcast, is the vocabulary around minstrels. The word that's used to describe Jacob de Bar in this document is ministrerius. And in Catalan, the most direct translation of that is ministrer, which sounds to us like minister, but that is a false cognate. So it's more like minstrel. And so when we're talking about the troubadours, they're often referred to as minstrels, but you'll also see the word joglar or joglares. So that's another word to look out for. And I think there is another word that begins with the letter T, something like that sounds close to troubadour, but I can't remember at the moment. If I do find that, I'll put it in the webpage for today's episode. Something else to point out as we're reading against the grain of this letter, which is that there's a specification of his belongings, Jacob de Bar, the minstrel, that are protected in this letter of safe conduct. That's super interesting. It's in the line that begins. Oh, let's see, where does it start? Okay, so it's line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The end of line 6. It starts with this phrase, duobus equatoris, his 2 horses. So the list begins, his 2 horses, his servants, his gold, his joke. This word is something that wasn't easily translated. I think his instruments, his jocalibus, and then other goods, aliis bonis. So there's this list of his things as he's traveling. What an interesting insight into the material culture of travels, that the minstrel, first of all, has 2 horses, the specific number, and then also has servants, and then has a bunch of goods, and then that he's got these instruments, that it's like this whole little caravan that's going. He's not just traveling on his own. This is like, I guess, your like coach bus, like when bands travel from city to city in our culture today, like they have the big coach bus. This is kind of like the equivalent of that. Like there's a little entourage. And so they all need to be specified and protected, not just the body of Jacob de Bar himself. And if you have that specified, then he can point to it and say, you tried to take one of my horses, I'm supposed to have 2. Interesting question arises if somehow they obtain a 3rd horse on the way, but I guess that is something you could expect to be consistent, that if you set out with 2 horses, you'd have 2 horses the whole time, unless one of them got into some kind of health problems or something. All right, so a wonderful use of the ablative case. I was talking about Latin case endings in an earlier episode, and this one has this whole list of belongings that are all with the endings that match their particular declension, is the term in Latin for the group of nouns that have the same pattern of ending. And so that's why we have this whole list of things, and they don't all have the exact same ending. Some of them have the ending of bus, and others have the ending of is. It's because they're in different noun groups, and those groups of nouns are called declensions. So a little bit of a Latin lesson there for you. All right. One other thing I wanted to mention with this letter, which is that it specifies a time period. That's really interesting. In the last line of the letter, last 2 lines I should say, Joan specifies that this safe conduct letter is for the upcoming month of April. That makes sense. But then he ends that sentence with et non ultra, no other time period. So this safe conduct letter is time-stamped. And it's a really interesting thing to ponder. Why do you need to timestamp your safe conduct letter? Well, there was this incident that I just found out about from 1384 in which a minstrel was engaged to assassinate the King of France. Yeah, in 1384. Who hired him to do that? It was the father of Charles III of Navarre, Violante de Bar's buddy. So Charles II, whose cognomen is the Bad. So Charles the Bad, I mean, this is one of the reasons he got that cognomen. He hired a minstrel to go poison the King of France, and like everybody, he was like, get the Duc de Berry too, like anyone who's there, kill them all. And so he set him up with a bunch of poison, and then this minstrel got caught and executed. And there's a really interesting article about that, like an old article written in 1949. It was an English minstrel, actually. So there's a whole like 100 Years' War dynamic going on in that too, the enmity between England and France and so on. All right, that was a digression, but it's all to point out that you don't want to have a minstrel, or really anybody, having this like blanket safe letter conduct that they could use at any time, because you don't know what they're going to be getting up to in the future. So you need to timestamp that. You need to time limit your safe conduct letter, and that's what's happening here. So I really hope that Jacob de Bar made it to his next destination during the month of April, because if not, he would have needed to get another safe conduct letter from somebody else. Oh, and then here's one last question. Oh my gosh, I'm really going long on this, but there's just so many that come up. Why do you need a safe conduct letter? What's so risky or dangerous about travel at this time? Okay, certainly there's like the fear of bandits on the road, like getting robbed, but like they're not going to care if you have a safe conduct letter, probably. So what's the risk? Like, is it really so risky to like show up to the next realm in the line of realms between, Barcelona and wherever you're going in France? Why is this so necessary? I have a feeling it's not so much about physical danger, although it could be, but I think there's certain costs that might be incurred, like taxes or tolls. Like, it was really common when you got to a new territory that, you were going from one place that was ruled by one monarch into some place that was ruled by another monarch or duke, that you'd have to pay like a gate fee to pass through. And I think maybe, I'm not sure about this, I have to research it more, but maybe in some cases the safe conduct was to get you out of having to pay as much. I'm not sure it could like get you like a kind of exemption from tolls or taxes, but maybe that's part of it. Not sure. And maybe it was just dangerous. Maybe, the first instinct when someone saw a minstrel entering the territory, the guardhouse, they were like, oh, this person's not vouched for by anybody, so let's take one of their 2 horses. I don't know. I need to research a little bit more about travel in the Middle Ages to try to figure out why Jacob de Bar really needed a safe conduct letter. Whew. All right. Well, there's other questions and other things that we could do reading against the grain with this document, but we have reached the end of the time for this episode, at least. Thanks for listening to this latest installment of the Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Multcara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.